My name's Mike, along with Aaron. I'm one of the co-organizers of the San Francisco MySQL Meetup group. We also have Josh from the Postgres group with us tonight. So we're going to be talking, Rob from Facebook is going to be talking about managing way too many database servers. So it should be fun and entertaining. We got a really good crowd tonight, so we'll keep things kind of short announcement-wise. August 9th, we're going to do a NoSQL roundup. It's going to be MongoDB, Cassandra, and a third option that is being voted on. So if you go to the event page, there's an option there to vote. And so vote on the third one that you want to see. Sponsors tonight, Percona, did all the food, beverages, all that kind of good stuff. Are you guys still hiring?
We're always hiring.
Percona is still hiring. CBS Interactive is hiring. We're looking for basically anybody in the web industry. So there's lots of different sites we work on. So product managers, project managers, developers, DBAs, ops, admin, you name it. We are looking for it. Josh, you got anything you want to say?
Oh, a few announcements. So I know we haven't scheduled any of the upcoming Postgres meetups yet. We actually do have 4 different speakers, but we haven't sorted out what order they're going to happen in yet. We'll do a general Postgres 9.1 one. We'll do the Madlib folks have finally had a release, and that's analytics inside the database engine. So they're going to be doing one. We're going to be doing Tim Childs is going to be. I'm not screen. Tim Childs, right? Tim Childs is going to be doing one in his Postgres queries on a GPU thing, and hopefully we'll do that at Cal at UC Berkeley. And Igor has one of some of the Dalabo tools. Here tonight? Oh, there we are. That we also need to schedule. So look for new ones being announced soon, but we will have August, September, October, November meetups, I guess, at this rate. Other stuff coming up, for any of you who weren't already aware, OSCON data. If they've sort of forked OSCON into OSCON Java, OSCON data is a couple weeks from now. I already posted a discount code to the SFPUG mailing list. If anybody did you already send one out for the MySQL folks?
I have not. Okay.
I mean, mind you, if you were going, you'd probably already be registered by now. So, since it's up in Portland. For Postgres, we have Postgres Open, which is sort of a Postgres business conference in September. And we're going to have more of a community, smaller conference at the end of September. That's pretty much events. Other stuff going on. We released Postgres 9.1 Beta 3 today. So out of our Postgres, how many people have downloaded and actually installed a beta of Postgres 9.1? Okay, a few. Okay. We need, right, this is beta period is the time for users to test things. And there is no way that we can test, particularly since we've got, 9 new major features in 9.1. And probably somewhere around like 40 or 50 minor features. There's no way that we can test them all in combination, particularly with the stuff that you use. So if you didn't test Postgres and we ship the final version and it breaks your application, it'll be your fault. So please download and test. We're almost to the end of the first commit fest on version 9.2, which is the next version after that. Have some exciting things for testing in there. There's a locking optimization that looks, that if it works out, will allow Postgres to scale up to as many cores as we've been able to test it on. Nice. So right now, Postgres tends to stop scaling up at around 32 cores. And this optimization will allow us to scale. We've only been able to test it on 128 to 128 cores, possibly beyond that. Minor features. I'm trying to remember anything that's actually gone in that was exciting. And a blanking right now. No, it's still in progress. It's still a work in progress. It's actually sounds really simple. It's 4 words, and it's not really simple in implementation. The which one? Crash safe visibility map, but for anybody who's not a Postgres engineer, that doesn't make sense. What that enables, what it is, it's an enabling feature for another feature that people really care about. One of the features that MySQL has that Postgres doesn't, which is index-only access for queries.
I think the crash safe visibility map patch did go in.
Oh, it did go in.
Pretty sure I saw it go.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, because if that went in, then we'll have index-only access for 9.2.
Yay.
Yay. So,
Big deal.
yes. The,
Yeah, it's a,
yep.
you should answer the, I mean, you want to answer, I mean, so everyone can hear.
What did you say? Index only what?
So index-only access. So what happens with index-only access is if you have a query and what you're requesting in the query, like say you're asking for 3 columns in the query, and you happen to have an index on those 3 columns, then you should be able to get back all of the data without ever touching the base table. Just get them from the index. Now, in MySQL InnoDB, you can. In Postgres, you can't because of this issue with visibility information, because concurrently running queries may have added nodes to the index that you're not supposed to be able to see yet. And that's what we're trying to solve, to add this feature without any loss of write performance. So.
Okay, and just in essence of time, we'll gonna get started here with Rob, and away we go. Thanks. Oh, don't forget to turn off your cell phones and computer or audio and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yep. All right. Go away. You. Presentation view. Where is my mouse? There we go. Howdy guys. So my name is Robert Wolch, and I'll be giving the talk, Lessons Learned for Managing Way Too Many Database Servers. I am a database administrator for Facebook. I do ops stuff. You can probably notice the bags under my eyes. It sort of goes along with the job. Agenda. Disclaimer, I usually need to have one of those with all of my talks because I make people angry. Comparison of Facebook and the last place I worked, which was a big hosting company that you've all heard of and many of you probably use, but I won't be naming it. Then I'll be talking about the lessons that I've learned over the last couple of years on the technology side. That'll be mostly DB agnostic. And then I'll be talking about what I've learned on the human side, which is definitely DB agnostic. So disclaimer, I'm going to say some things. They're what I've learned. They don't necessarily at all mean that I'm speaking for Facebook, even though the Facebook name is on some of my slides. In general, it represents the view of the database operations team at Facebook, which is a very small group of people, and it's a big organization. Your mileage may vary, blah, blah, blah. So who am I? 5 years ago, I dropped out of college and became a web developer. A couple of years later, I got laid off, thought to myself what do I want to do with my life, and I became a DBA. 6 months ago, I moved to the Bay Area to work for Facebook. So I've now worked for 2 pretty big deployments of open source databases, and things that work very differently at the 2 of them. And in this presentation, I'm going to sort of brain dump what I imagine somebody with a couple hundred database servers might be interested in learning from me. So Facebook has 3 database teams that deal with MySQL, engineering, which is a whole bunch of software engineers who work on database internals, performance, which are guys that deal with performance, and then ops, which I'm part of. although we can all do little bits of the others. Quick poll, how many of you guys are developers and how many developers? Oh, wow. And how many of you guys are DBAs? Wow, pretty good mix. So comparison of two big environments. So my last gig was working for a very large hosting company, maybe the largest, maybe not, and it depends on how you count. A whole bunch of big environments, shared hosting, email, PKI, DNS, all with MySQL backends. The stuff with money actually ran through MS SQL, or some of it did, but pretty much everything else ran through MySQL. We had like 10 big environments and about 30 smaller environments. And by smaller, that's anything from 2 to, I don't know, 20, 30 servers, something like that. And a lot of those I just didn't remember, couldn't keep track of. And that was a problem. We had many bad single points of failure. How many of you guys know what a single point of failure is? Cool. And when I say a bad single point of failure, I mean server goes down, causes cascading failure, impacting a whole bunch of other stuff. You get the server back up, and the impact lasts for a while and is pretty widely dispersed. The environment was x, xxx servers, so fairly large. Facebook is simpler. There is one really big environment called the UDB, which is Universal Database, User Database. Not sure what we're calling it this week. There are half dozen other smaller environments, and no really bad single points of failure. Server goes down, may have some impact, but it doesn't spread, or at least not that I have seen as yet. Both gigs, automation has been the focus. Both places, the server count was growing, and growing faster than they wanted to grow the DBA count, faster than they necessarily could grow the number of DBAs. So in order to scale the DBA team, automation was key. Both places, one-offs, meaning something different from standard, consumed massive amounts of time. This could be a small environment of 2 servers, master or slave, that nobody necessarily would remember, or it could be some weird backup requirement that's special to this environment, and things like that just consume massive amounts of time in both environments and were generally pretty hated. Both places, every day was really interesting because there was always a new problem and new types of problems, and it was constant. Both places have no automated failover, none at all. Both companies were somewhat terrified of going into a split brain condition. Quick poll, how many of you guys know what split brain is? Cool. How many don't? Some. Basic idea is you have, like, let's say a master and slave, master taking rights and pushing changes down to the slave. Something happens, and suddenly you have 2 masters with the same data set and rights going to both, and you're probably losing data whenever you try to converge the 2 of them. It's a really bad state to be in, and it takes a lot of work to do automated failover correctly, and it's not something that's happened at either place yet. We were almost entirely bare metal at both gigs, which I think is somewhat interesting. My last gig, there were a number of VMs when I started, and I took a little bit of joy in killing them. Almost entirely direct attached storage inside of the 2U, 4U, whatever, with a little tiny bit of NAS thrown in there, but not all that much. A whole lot of other similarities, a lot. Differences. Facebook is pretty awesome for the quality of the people that they hire. It's people who had previously managed like large environments or somewhat large and are fairly senior. My last job, it was not as senior. A lot of people would come in, get experience, become more senior, maybe stay, maybe go to somewhere else where their skills were more useful. Current gig, automation is, at Facebook, the automation is quite good. Building out new servers is one command line command. With a couple of switches in there, boom, it's done. Automation has been the focus for a while, and it's at this point pretty advanced. Another difference, tier 1 response. At my last job, if the server went down in the middle of the night or an alarm went off, somebody in the US was getting a call. At Facebook, we have a team of really, really good Linux admins who take care of most of the low-hanging fruit. Server dies, they can build a new master, slave, whatever, bring it online. They can deal with most issues. And if there's a problem, they will get a DBA on the phone and get it dealt with. We have a location here and a location in Western Europe. Let's see, differences, change management. How many of you guys know what ITIL is? Wow, not many. Change management was a big deal at my last job. So I spent about a third of my time writing up change orders, talking to management, getting it approved, and it was necessary. The environment was a lot more fragile and the staff was not as senior. Facebook doesn't have that much change management at all. It's, if something needs to happen, it happens. You ask a coworker, get them to sign off, make sure necessarily your manager knows, something like that, and boom, you go do it. Another difference is productivity tools. Inside of Facebook, like our tool for who gets assigned tasks, it's like fun to use. I'm going to approve that diff and I'm going to put a funny picture on it. And food. Food is like really near and dear to my heart, and the food at Facebook is really, really good. I mean, really, really good. There are a whole bunch of other differences. It's a job. Previous place was a different job, different state. So I've been doing this for a few years now, and I've come to some conclusions. I'm probably wrong about some of these. So, but here's what I've learned so far. Simplicity is the key to operational sanity. Simple systems fail in simple ways. Complex systems fail in complicated ways. And when something fails in the middle of the night, when you're really tired and you're running on like 2 brain cells, and you're having to debug something that you built when you had like all the brain cells going, that's bad. Everything breaks, and one way or another, it's never going to break at an opportune time. So simplicity is like the most important thing that I've learned on the technology side. So going back to what I said about split brain, multi-master is not simple. It can fail in really complicated ways, and it would be very difficult in many cases to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. As an example of how afraid I know some people, one fellow in particular who is fairly senior, who was walking back to his desk one day and heard split brain and turned around and walked back away. Anyways, same sort of problems with automated failovers. I've sort of already covered this a little bit, but it's not simple. It may well be worth it, particularly as environments grow bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's a difficult thing to get right. So, another observation. Complicated grants are complicated. If every application server has a different user on each DB server, it's going to take a lot of time to implement it. And if humans are implementing it, DBAs are implementing it, their time might be better spent doing something like automated failover, something like that. A lot of time can go into this, into making very, very fine-grained grants. I don't necessarily believe it's the best use of time. It's been my observation that network security and application security are dramatically more important. If somebody's on your network, sooner or later they're going to pop a box and they're in. If they can, same deal with overwriting, get variable or something and injecting. If one of those happens, you're gone anyways, or probably. So continuing, changing hardware. I've seen environments where like every 3 to 6 months new hardware would come in and it would be a little bit different. Maybe it's faster CPUs, maybe it's more RAM, maybe the I/O is a little bit different. It made life very complicated. If a server dies and you need to replace it and you have replacements that are 3 months older, don't necessarily know if when you shove it in the rack it'll be fast enough. Inventory management becomes a lot more complicated and becomes no fun. So not getting new hardware constantly is really useful. Once a year, figure out what the newest, latest, and greatest is and change, but more than that, I don't think it's necessarily wise. All right, to my first probably disagreeable point of the night, I don't like floater IPs. How many of you guys know what a floater IP is? Okay. General idea is that you have like a master server or slave or a hot backup server, and when the master dies for whatever reason or plan failover or whatever, you want to promote the slave, you move an IP address from one to the other. Sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty easy. I've had a lot of problems with the network not actually responding to send ARP requests, that sort of thing. I don't believe that it necessarily works for failover, and I've had to manage getting a whole lot of servers in, figuring out where they should go, and that's no fun. It would consume a lot of my time, and I would end up having to go talk to the networking guys and saying, hey, this server didn't end up on the right VLAN. What's going on, guys? And that's no fun. Same deal when a server needed to be replaced. It died, failed over, it's dead in the rack, needs to go away. Cool. Let me get another server and replace it. Well, I'm having to go through another team. And that takes a whole lot of time, and that means that I'm not self-reliant. And that makes life complicated. And complicated is bad. Another thing I'm going to say, which may or may not be agreeable, I don't like SATA. SAS drives are significantly more expensive, but they're much more reliable. SATA drives, I've seen bits flip, and that's no fun. So in InnoDB, data when it goes to disk is checksummed. If it changes, if a bit flips on disk when it comes back out, you know. You know that a checksum failed to match and that there's something very, very wrong with the box and you need to get off of it. I didn't see that type of problem with SAS drives. Dealing with SATA, I see it quite frequently. There are lots of uses for SATA, and I'm not trying to put it down, but for my use, where automated failover does not exist, it consumes a lot of time. Same sort of deal with MySQL or in the Postgres world, fsync off. If a server can corrupt when it goes down, I don't want to deal with it. That means it's going to consume DBA time when it comes back up. Maybe different if you have automated all of your failover, but until then, it's a liability, particularly when you have a lot of servers. Servers bounce, some, and whenever they do, it's a whole lot of time. Other things which I don't think are scalable. Having different methods of connecting and different logic for failure. If there's a network problem or something and you're investigating, it's good to be able to make assumptions. And if your assumptions don't necessarily hold up because a behavior is different from one application to another, that makes life more complicated. So error logs being aggregated is another thing. It's great if they are, and if they're not, it's really hard to know necessarily if you have a problem. It's really great to be able to say, I expect 1 megabyte per minute or second or month, whatever, of errors, and if I've got 4 times that, I know I have a problem. Not necessarily going to stare at each and every byte that goes into the error log, but just knowing the magnitude of errors that you're expecting is really useful. And then you can drill down and figure out what's going on. But if every application, and you have multiple applications, it has its own type of error logging, that will end up consuming DBA time, or more likely, I think, problems will just not be noticed. Another thing which I don't think is scalable, having multiple stateful systems on a single host. I want to own the database on a host, and I don't want anything else on the host to need another human to get back up if for some reason the server has an issue. I want to know everything that's going on so that if there's a problem, I can handle it. I don't have to call out to somebody else and be reliant on them fixing problems on something that I'm working on. I don't want to have to be up in the middle of the night for longer than I need to, which is pretty much my motivation for a lot of what I do in my life. So I've seen some bigger environments, and I've come to the conclusion that weird happens. Servers blip and die a lot. Not necessarily all that often if you're looking at one server in the rack, but given enough time and enough servers, it's constant. Maybe multiple times a day, maybe multiple times an hour. Who knows? But there are constant problems. And treating them as significant issues is going to take a whole lot of time. Sometimes getting to root cause is important. Other times it's not. Oops, something weird happened. As long as it doesn't happen again, I don't necessarily care to ever find out why. The network is not reliable at all. And by the network, I'm not blaming the network guys. Mostly I'm blaming the $3 piece of Cat5 or Cat6 going from the server to the switch, or I'm blaming the NIC. I might be blaming the firmware. But one way or another, a lot of my problems in life have come from the network being weird and not reliable. And when servers are run full tilt, 100%, full throttle, things get weirder, particularly with like NIC drivers. Servers will freeze up and die a lot more often and probably come back, or maybe the hardware will just burn out faster. I've seen a lot of problems with that in the past. I've also seen, sir?
So you don't like 100%?
I don't dislike 100%, but at 100%, I do and I don't. One way or another, database hardware is really expensive, and not getting every cent of performance out of it is going to cost the company a lot of money. Sometimes it makes sense to back things off a little bit. A lot of the time, it's just the cost of doing business in a large environment. In any case, weird happens, usage patterns change, and without warning. I've seen it a bunch of times. Software developer will make a change in the application, the change will go out, no warning is given to the DBAs or to the network guys, and the application pattern, usage pattern changes. It all falls into what is weird and what's going on, and probably the weirdest thing that I have encountered so far are applications that get forgotten, and servers that get forgotten, and servers that get forgotten before they're ever in use. It's the first time, this particular problem at my previous job, first time I found my salary's worth of servers that had been provisioned, put in the racks and were burning power for 3-4 years, their entire useful lifespan, and never did anything useful. That made me really, really sad. I've seen it a number of times since then. It's really depressing, but it does happen. You have enough servers going around, enough people touching them, things get forgotten. Weird happens, bugs exist. Databases have bugs. You run them at 100% utilization, you see a lot more bugs. You see a lot more behaviors which are not expected by the user. New features also have many more bugs. They may be really, really useful, but they have quite a few bugs. Expecting software to be 100% reliable is not a good idea, in my experience.
How long do you believe between new release coming out and you adopting it?
It depends on how much you need the feature. Previous job, we would wait 6 months, something like that. Mostly, I would look at every minor revision that would come out and see how scary the bugs were until it's like, okay, things are more stable and I'm okay, or I think we'll be okay. Sometimes I was wrong. Sometimes other people were making the judgment and needed the feature, and life happens. Bugs happen. Same deal with operating systems and firmware. Firmware in particular. There are some good combinations and there are some very bad combinations, and the good combinations may well not be the newest. Firmware in particular. I've seen several cases where particular versions of firmware kills hardware. And it's really, really aggravating when it gets deployed to a lot of servers and you start seeing a pattern. That servers with firmware A are dying a whole lot more often than servers with firmware B. One way or another, upgrades are a gamble. You know the problems, or with a big enough environment, you come to understand what problems exist in certain versions of firmware and software. And if you need to upgrade for some reason, you're going to get other issues. So it's a gamble, or at least that's my observation. Let's go back to what I said, what we were talking about earlier. Very new software has issues, and very, very, very new software has more. This is the MySQL and Postgres Meetup. Both pieces of software have been around in some form for 25 years now, thereabouts, 15, 25, somewhere in there. Cassandra, very new. Couch, very new. Facebook created, used, and no longer uses Cassandra at all, to my understanding. A lot of other people use it. I've heard great things about it, but one way or another, Facebook doesn't use it at all. My last gig, I had to support CouchDB, which a lot of people really like, but it was painful. Not necessarily Couch's fault, but it's a very, very new piece of software, and that's the breaks with really new software. Weird happens, backups fail. This was a big problem at my last gig. This is, I'm sure, a big problem at a lot of companies. Not sure if I can actually speak about that, but I will say that it's not anything that's particularly secretive. It's out there, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure that if you search Google.
You allude to a tool? Callahan said it at a prior conference.
I'm not going to confirm or deny. I'm pretty sure it's on the MySQL at Facebook page, and one way or another, Facebook looks at a lot of different technologies, and it's always in flux. So good reporting is a must on backups. It's very easy to ignore backups when you have other things on fire and other things that are broken and members of management saying, this needs to be fixed now, this application needs to be launched tomorrow, and oh, there was a problem with that. We've got a master, we've got 2 slaves, something like that. It'll probably be okay. It'll probably be okay until it's not okay. And then people are possibly losing their jobs or possibly losing customers. It's something that I think a lot of companies end up getting burned by before they do well. You have to have alarms, have to have a lot of standardization, At my last job, there were, at one point when we fixed things, just before we fixed things, 128 different variations of the backup script. Some of them were just white space differences. Some of them were completely different iterations. We standardized everything. Backup script, canonical, same thing on every single host, and a configuration file. And that worked. And whenever backups didn't work, an alarm went off, and somebody looked at it. And then life was good. Reporting, having an alarm that goes off. Yeah, one way or another, if backups fail, you want to know about it. It may not be the first priority to get fixed, because there may be other things that are broken, maybe other things that are down, but you want to know. And maybe the next time they run, a few hours later or something like that, they'll be okay. Maybe not. One way or another, if you don't know, then you don't know, and you're playing with fire. At least that's my observation. So what do I like? I've said that I don't like floater IPs. It's been my observation that abstracted DSNs work, meaning that there's some centralized service out there where you say, hey, I need to talk to data source foo, and it gives you an IP address, a port, whatever, and then you go talk to it. This makes things like automated failover much simpler because you're not relying on the network. You can just change the service itself, and then the application moves. Being able to throw a service into maintenance mode via command line utility is very scalable. Having to go through an application team to put an application into maintenance mode is going to take a lot of time and end up consuming a lot more downtime for planned maintenance and for unplanned failures. I really, really like abstracted DSNs with the ability to throw an application into maintenance mode. What scales? Having multiple instances per server. It's a really good assumption to make very early on when you're building an environment, because sooner or later the newest, greatest hardware will be out and you can do twice as much work, or you can let the server be idle and waste money. And wasting money is not good. People don't like to waste money, particularly not on database quality hardware. So making the assumption early on that one way or another there are multiple.
I was going to ask, what kind of node sizes do you normally get? Do you normally go for the biggest and best, or do you try and get more smaller nodes?
Facebook actually has multiple sizes. GoDaddy had multiple sizes depending upon the workload. Oh. Such is life. So another thing that scales, this goes back to what I said earlier about backup script and having many, many different derivations. Having everything being kept in sync with something. I don't really care what it is, that's scalable. Because one way or another, things change all the time. And if scripts that are maintaining the health of the servers aren't kept completely synchronized, then at some point somebody's going to get a call at 3 a.m. They're going to log in, think, oh, I can fix this with this little itty-bitty change, and then they're going to walk away. And the environment just got more complicated.
Backing up your DSN abstraction, what are you using?
Facebook has a custom system which is very, very Facebook-y. Makes a lot of assumptions about the Facebook environment. It could be as simple as something that looks like DNS. It doesn't have to be complicated to be really effective. I'm not saying use DNS, but the general idea of DNS of, hey, key value store or something similar, I give you a string, you give me back some information.
It's not proxying it or using
No, not really. No. All it is the application asking for where to go for the data. Not going through an intermediate service. Service. Need a little drink of water. At my last gig, I had lots and lots of pain with reprovisioning hosts. I noted earlier that the latest, greatest operating system may not be the best, but sometimes you decide it is. And for one reason or another, you have hardware laying around with the old operating system. It's very nice to be able to say with one command on the command line, go reprovision this host and make it new, make it sparkly, make it shiny, and having it happen and work every single time. Also, weird things happen. I think I've covered weird happens, and sometimes hosts have problems, and it may be a configuration problem, and I may not care to track it down. And tracking down a configuration problem in Linux can take a lot of time. So just saying, reprovision it, can save a lot of time. May not necessarily get down to the root problem, but if the root problem was an earlier configuration that you're getting off of, doesn't matter. What scales? Warm spares. Plus, 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 plus. Really important. Having some percentage of your environment, hosts available that can be thrown somewhere when you need them. Not having warm spares and not having quick reprovisioning of hosts will end up causing unending crises for crises. Not sure what the right word. Crises. Thank you. I'll speak to what my previous employer did, and I think it's fairly standard of you provision a host, you get it so that it passes all of your sanity checks, and then you just let it sit. And it may not work when you need it, but if you have a couple others, something will work, and you can take a look at the problem hosts later on. Maybe. Or maybe it'll just get forgotten. What scales? Having somebody to call when things go very, very, very wrong. There are probably a few consulting companies here that love me saying this, but yeah. Having an expert on the other end of the phone line when something very weird is happening is very nice. As an example, at my last gig, there was a security issue with MySQL, and they released patches when they announced it for the most recent version of MySQL. However, we were running, amongst other things, older versions which were unsupported. So they contacted a very good MySQL consulting company, and 10 hours later, we were running safe and secure versions of MySQL for everything, including the versions which were no longer supported. Being able to do this, not necessarily doing it all the time, but having the option of calling out for help for something that you're not prepared to deal with is really good. So that's about all that all that I think is notable on the technology side. And I'm probably wrong. Just say it again. So what have I learned on the human side? This is, I think, easily more important than the technology stuff. The technology stuff can be learned, but the human stuff, it's much more innate. A great admin must be a good developer, and a great developer must be a good admin. One of my buddies a number of years ago said that to me, and I found that to be the case. When dealing with large environments where suddenly you may have hundreds of servers that have problems, knowing how to program is very, very, very important. And having worked as a programmer is very, very useful for people that become admins. DBAs are also, and net admins, the canary in the coal mine. We end up seeing problems before a lot of the developers see it, and it's good to be able to go into the application to try to track down the problem. May not be the most effective person in tracking down the problem, but as the DBA or the net admin, knowing the symptoms is combined with being able to research the application well is very, very useful. So at both gigs, the criteria for a new DBA was the same. They must know a P language, Perl, Python, PHP. One of them. Know it well. And if we're using a different P language, they can figure it out. They must have good Linux and Bash knowledge. They don't necessarily need to be experts on this, or expert programmers for that matter, but they need to have the knowledge. I'm not a Linux expert. If somebody needs to have me write a Kickstart script or build RPMs, I'm going to Google. I don't do it much, and I'm not good at it. We have other folks on the team that are much better, but I have my own strengths. And the last thing is having decent database knowledge. There are enough people on the team that for really complicated problems, there's probably somebody who's seen it before or has the necessary skills to figure it out. But the other two issues are more important from what I've seen, being a good programmer and knowing Linux well. So being an expert is not a requirement. Any of those three things, not at all requirement. Being humble probably should be. All the time we're faced with things that we don't know, we don't understand, and we're wrong a lot. Accepting that you're wrong on something because you made a bad assumption is like really, really, really useful because we're all wrong a lot. So when a new admin comes along, there's a really long ramp-up time. I've been with Facebook for about 6 months, and I'm finally becoming somewhat useful. I'm getting things done slowly. A year seems to be the point where people are fully up to speed. That's a lot of time. There are many people out there who are qualified and willing to do the job, so it's no fun realizing that you need more people and trying to fill the void because it takes a long time to get them useful. It's a stressful gig. Last job, manager asked me, do you smoke or do you drink? And he asked this to all new employees. And if people would say, no, I don't smoke and I don't drink, he would say, you will. I drink. Current gig, I've heard one person say, by taking this job, you will always have a job. The skills are in demand, all that fun, happy nonsense. By taking this job, you'll also shorten your life. Yeah. Long, erratic hours, lots of stress. You make a mistake, it has lots of impact, but the pay is pretty good. The work is really interesting, and it's never going away. Or at least, I don't think so. With the high stress and the erratic hours, burnout is very, very, very real. Facebook is actually pretty good about dealing with this. There are always problems, and if you want to stay and work on something until all the problems are resolved, you're never going home. And sometimes you're in a mood to do that, and maybe that goes on for a month until you burned out, and then you show up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and nobody notices. Facebook is really, really good with come and go as you please as long as you get your work done. So when people burn out, and it's common, it happens, they can recover. That's not necessarily the case at all companies. And it's not necessarily the case all the time at all companies. So it is what it is. It's part of the business. When you lose a person, when you don't have enough people, lack of DBAs causes paralysis. New applications can't necessarily go out. Changes to applications can't necessarily go out. Problems existing in production don't necessarily get solved. And that is what it is. Running at 100% utilization on your DBAs, just like your hardware, causes faults, and, well, it is what it is. So finding people is really difficult, as I'm sure some of the folks in this room know. Word of mouth is incredibly useful. So you have somebody working for you and they say their buddy John, Jane is good. It's probably useful to really, really think about them. That's my observation. Nobody's an expert on anything, but somebody with the right attitude and the right prerequisite knowledge is useful. Saying, I don't know, during an interview is a really good answer. I really can't stress that enough, particularly when I've done interviews with people and I can hear them Googling in the background. And it's sometimes really depressing because they're doing well and, you know, maybe they hit something that they don't know about and I can hear the typing, but it doesn't necessarily matter and I really want to like them, but then I don't know. And don't necessarily say no more interviews for you, but it's difficult when somebody's Googling in the background.
Maybe they're updating their status on Facebook.
Oh, maybe. Maybe they're Twittering. Maybe they're on Facebook. Who knows? It is what it is. So things that really don't matter. 5 years of experience does not matter. Most of the people that I've worked with don't have 5 years of experience, and if somebody puts that on a help wanted, well, good luck to them.
My favorite was the year after Dojo first came out. I saw job ads asking for 5 years of experience with Dojo.
Yeah, I think if somebody is good with databases, within 5 years, they're going to find someplace that they're really, really happy, and they're probably not going to leave very easily. And when they do leave, it'll be going to someplace that they have a friend. So just putting an ad out there saying, I want 5 years of experience is probably not going to be successful. Same thing, asking for something like multi-master experience. If they're not actually running it, and I've seen that before, it scares people who know the technology well off. So that is what it is. CS degrees don't matter at all. Sorry, if you spent 4 years and a whole bunch of money getting one, if you want to be a DBA, it just doesn't matter, at least in the free and open source world. Is what it is. So I've talked about weirdness. I've talked about human issues. Mistakes happen constantly, particularly when people are very tired. And as I've noted, long erratic hours, people will get tired. Mistakes happen all the time. So one of the things that I try to be good about at this point is protecting myself. Whenever I make a change, one of the questions I always ask myself is, how do I roll back? And I ask the person requesting the change, how do you roll back? It doesn't sound complicated or like something that's unintuitive, but it's been very, very important in my life to realize that each and every time a change happens, I need to ask these questions. Writing scripts on the assumption that they're going to fail halfway through for some random reason and that they'll need to be run again, like repeatedly, without any cleanup, is another thing that helps with mistakes. Mistakes happen one way or another, and sometimes you're cleaning up for yourself. And having a script which can be run multiple times is very, very good, in my experience anyways. So I talked about trying to protect myself. I also want to protect dev. If something bad happens, I'm going to probably be the one restoring their database and hoping to not lose good dev or have some other consequence, but one way or another, no fun. So giving dev DDL is just bad, particularly when it's a large environment. If there are hundreds or more servers that need a change done to them, somebody whose job it is to push the change should probably be pushing the change to make sure it's done uniformly. Restricting DML as much as possible is also a very good thing. So mistakes happen, noted backups, be prepared to restore all of them at once. At Facebook in the time, sir?
How do you manage deployment of DDL across hundreds of servers? Data definition language.
Create
So
table,
you're
alter table. At this point, I'm the one pushing it, and Well, Facebook released a class called Online Schema Change, which allows MySQL to make changes without much impact. Postgres people, your life is much better than MySQL in this regard. A lot of changes are not impactful. MySQL, not quite as good as Postgres in that aspect. So
I was thinking more of the issue of trying to deploy the DDL change across that many servers.
Oh.
More, in a more or less continuous fashion.
So one of the assumptions that gets made at Facebook is that all of the code should be backwards compatible with previous iterations of the schema. So it may take a week to push out the new schema, something like that. And everything should be hunky-dory on both versions, the old version and the new version. So backups get used. At Facebook, since I've been there, we've had to restore all the backups. We haven't needed to actually replace everything in use, but to pull out one table's worth, all the backups needed to get restored. So this also sort of goes back to what I said about having spare servers. When you need a whole lot of computing juice to crank on uncompressing a whole bunch of backups, those spare servers come in handy. So, yeah. Mistakes happen. Executions are expensive. Somebody gets fired, everybody else starts thinking about what happens if they get fired, and then they find different jobs. I've seen that. I've heard about it. It is what it is. The grass is often greener elsewhere. And on that note, anybody who wants a challenge, please join me, help me with my problems, help the team that I'm on with our problems. If nothing else, it'll be probably an interesting interview. The food is really, really good.
People who are interviewing, are
Yes.
you doing that Christian thing where no bathroom, no?
No, there's definitely a lunch that's thrown in with the on-site interview, which is, I love the food at Facebook. I really can't overstate that. Sir? So talking with the chefs, it's pretty normal for people to put on like 10 or 15 pounds. I initially didn't put on any weight, and I've put on somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds now. Usually, I guess people lose it over the course of the first year and come out about the same, but it is what it is. Sir?
What's your ratio of DBAs to databases?
So, not going to answer that question. We don't release the number of servers that we have, and the number of DBAs that we have isn't that hard to figure out. So, I apologize. I won't be able to answer that question.
Elaborate on why Facebook are using any other.
So this was way long time before I started, that they quit using Cassandra. I've heard from people, and I don't know if it's the truth, but there were operational issues that were significant. I don't know if that's accurate. A lot of staff has come and gone since then, so I don't know. It was really new software that they built, used, and then they don't use it anymore. MySQL is our relational database of choice. Sir? Question is, would I use like a serial column auto increment or UIDs? I think that, yes, UUIDs. So something to think about with InnoDB, which is what I work on, is that all data is stored in the primary key. And if you're using a UUID, then you won't necessarily have a hot portion of the table and a cold portion of the table. You're going to get a lot of random accesses. So in InnoDB at least, there are probably pretty good reasons to have a more meaningful primary key, since primary key is meaningful. For Postgres users, this is not the case. So it depends on your platform, and it depends on your application and how you want to do it. Sir?
Can you speak a little bit to the scale, or give us some idea of proportions you have? How many users in your community? We know you've got some number, small number of thousand servers. Can we anticipate that you could take this number of users? You know, we hear various numbers in the press about how many users you have and kind of divide that out. And if you could speak a little bit to that for us so we have some idea of how you're divvying that out, if you kind of know. You're doing shards, right? So you're...
Everything's sharded out in the UDB, the Universal Database. And as to how many users we have, Mark Zuckerberg in a presentation last week said that we had, I don't actually remember the number. It's
Scale. What order of magnitude, you know?
hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions. And you've got, what, 2,000, 3,000 server nodes?
I can't answer that question.
Well, can you give us an idea of, you know, what scale number in?
No, I can't.
But we're talking 4 digits, not 5.
I can't answer that question.
Okay, fine.
I apologize.
What's the range of size of databases? Can you say if you have hundreds of gigs, terabytes?
We have a lot of different sizes, depending on different uses, and I really can't speak of the average, but we have a lot of different sizes. The biggest and the smallest are one-offs, so they're not meaningful. At both my current gig and my last gig, there were very, very large databases that were one-offs, and they were what they were. I'm saying I can't answer that a lot. I apologize, guys. Sir?
What's your policy in terms of which flavor of MySQL?
Our own in-house. So I mentioned that we have software engineers who work on MySQL internals. We have our own custom builds with that addresses the problems that we see in production. So it's our own special sauce. Most of, or all, I'm not sure if it's most or if it's all, but the changes that we do are released like fairly often, every 3-6 months, something like that, maybe yearly. One way or another, almost everything that we're doing is available. Sir?
How do you guys feel about Oracle?
Say again?
How do you guys feel about Oracle taking over?
I can't answer that. In a lot of ways, it is what it is. I mean, life happens. Good, bad, I don't know. So one thing I failed to note at the beginning was that I am on the IOUG MySQL Council. So one way or another, Oracle has a lot of vested interests in MySQL, and having a somewhat harmonious relationship with the community, I think, is valuable. This is in no way the policy of Facebook, pro or against, but they pay for a lot of development. So my personal viewpoint on Oracle is very positive. They do a lot of work that they give to the community in GPL product. I can't hate them. Jeff?
There was an article recently that was, all I saw was like an article about something Stonebreaker said or wrote.
Oh.
So I don't really
Would have
have
put
a lot
that.
of context on it, but I assume you did see it.
Yep.
Might have some comments.
All right.
I think this is at least some of the reference.
The title is Facebook Trapped in MySQL, Fate Worse Than Death.
Yeah.
So no comment on the article itself, but it sounds like we're going to have shirts made.
You can have it. You can have it. I have a few extra copies if anybody wants.
Sir?
Yeah, do you run your own custom
InnoDB.
for everything?
So I said that my exam I didn't think was scalable, and it's that's been, yeah, InnoDB. InnoDB. It's a very good storage engine. Sir? So if suddenly tomorrow we had to run the default, we would have a couple additional problems, but we would definitely survive. It's usually the changes are made to specific performance degradations with our specific workload or specific bugs that we run into which aren't fixed in the version of MySQL that we run. So that sort of thing. And I'm sure there's more, but it's to address Facebook-specific problems. Sir?
On your typical mythical mid-range workload database servers, what would you say the average ratio of the database size to RAM? How much of
I can't speak to what's actually on the boxes, or I'm not sure if I can answer that, but there's definitely a segment of the database which is not hot in RAM. So take that for what it is. More than that, I don't think I should say. Sir?
So I took a look last year at a script that it looked kind of neat, but there's like a few of these like documents. Can you talk about like you guys use that often? Is it pretty safe? Well tested?
I'm not sure if I can speak to really operational details. Online schema change exists and other companies are using it. With every piece of software there are issues. I haven't run into anything particularly horrific in my uses of it over the last couple of years. So take that for what it is. But as with everything else, your use case may vary. Sir?
What are your monitoring weapons of choice, and what are the most important things that?
Monitoring, we do it on all custom stuff built for Facebook. But like the 2 or 3 things that I look at when I get in the morning are the number of DB errors of any sort, which also I'll look at like connection failures, failed queries, that sort of thing. And there are a couple other things, but mostly I'm just looking for like magnitude of errors of any sort. Sir?
So, 2 questions. One, in your earlier slide, you said that you prefer local storage instead of you said something that you guys have in Facebook. So, if you have multiple instances of the database or a server, spread across disks, stripe them.
Well, I think that the common advice for what RAID levels to use with databases is it's pretty generic. And I think the more interesting question is how big are the instances, and do you have multiple instances that are the same size, or do you do a small one or a big one? And it varies, and I don't think we have an answer yet internally. It's something that we definitely play with. At my last gig, it was less streamlined, and one way or another, I don't have specific advice for what to do with it, but making the assumption that you will have multiple instances is really valuable down the line. Retrofitting all of your scripts will take a long time if you have to do it.
And you guys still have a local, you still use local storage at Facebook, or
We use DAS for pretty much everything, local storage.
the second question I had was, you talk about shards.
Yeah.
You have, I'm assuming it's user to a shard. Do you have a master key for that, or do you have some sort of algorithm?
I actually don't know all the details of how that's done. I think there's some hashing mechanism, and I don't know the process that it goes through. Sir?
What of the 3 groups deal with security?
We have, I don't know. I think we all deal with security in different ways, but I don't think it's necessarily directly the responsibility of any of those teams. There is definitely a security team that deals with security issues at Facebook, and it's something that they take and the company takes very seriously. But in amongst the database teams, I think we all have different responsibilities dealing with security. More than that, I don't know or can't necessarily say. All right, anybody else? Sir. I believe it. I'm not sure how much I can say about this, but prominent companies have claimed that we buy things from them. You can come to, I'm pretty sure that it's publicly available, at least some of what we use. So one way or another, there's a lot of information that's publicly available, and I'd rather say less than I need to, and you can draw your own conclusions with what's available. It may be right, it may not be. Josh?
So you're saying multiple instances. Is that virtual hosts or running on multiple instances of MySQL running on regular hosts?
What do you mean by virtual hosts? Meaning like running them in separate...
running them in VMware or zones or whatever.
No virtualization.
Okay.
Everything's bare metal, or at least that I know of. The environment's big, and I could definitely be missing things.
How do you manage cross data center?
We use MySQL replication, and the so replication lag is not a problem that's fully solved. And one way or another, I mentioned being able to, through automated tools, putting servers into a maintenance mode such that they don't take reads. That plays a part into it. It's a challenge that we haven't, or that doesn't, how do I want to word this? It's a challenge, but it's not nearly as much of a challenge now.
You also mentioned the DSN earlier, command line going into
Yeah.
abstracting DSN.
Yes.
Is that, some idea of how to do this?
Well, think about DNS. You want to go to www.facebook.com. So you throw that into your browser. That's where you want to go. DNS will turn that into an IP. So something similar. And then you communicate with an IP address. That, in terms of something to brew yourself, that's not particularly complicated. Throw a master and a slave up and surround it by some memcache, something like that. That's not one of the really difficult challenges, I don't think. Not that I'm suggesting that anybody do it or don't do it, but I imagine that would work fine. It is what it is. We use MySQL for a lot.
Everything last I heard.
We have multiple technologies, and we're constantly looking at other ones. And honestly, I don't know the full breadth of what we're doing. So I know that we use MySQL for most everything. There are other things that get used. Like we did a tech talk a month or two ago about our messaging product, and it has one of the NoSQL solutions behind it. I don't actually remember which of them in particular it was, but you can Google.
Tell you what's been public on the analytics side is so I can answer this because I'm answering out of information that's already public. So so I've heard about Vertica, Greenplum, and Infobright in different parts of Facebook. Yeah.
One way or another, we use a lot of MySQL, and we use a lot of InnoDB. it is what it is. Sir?
I read something a long time ago about this, and I didn't see anything about it since. But it was about sort of sidestepping the query optimizer and sending value requests directly in. Has Facebook ever looked at that?
I don't know. One thing I will tell you that we do use is a lot of index hinting. We know exactly what index should be used for a query, and the optimizer, while cheap, at least, and much cheaper than necessarily the Postgres optimizer, it's still a cost, and it's still overhead. So force index foo with a straight join or no join at all, do all the thinking ahead of time for the optimizer, it's less things for the database to do. Wiki, which is quickly out of date, and it's a struggle to keep everything up to date all the time. Always need to make an assumption that you don't know what you don't know. It is what it is.
Have you seen something better?
I think wikis are pretty good. It makes it makes it very easy to go in and make a change. What's bad is when changes happen in production and they aren't documented, which happens, I think, everywhere. Josh?
What are recommended tools for large-scale log consolidation?
I think Facebook has open sourced a couple. Things like Scribe. There are, I'm not the right person to speak to this. I just use the output of them. And yeah, I'm not the right person to ask.
So you said you force indexes on a bunch of queries. So you monitor the cardinality of indexes?
We know,
See if it changes over time to see if the force index is still...
we know our environment and we know our schema very well, or at least the people on the performance team do. I don't actually know the names of more than like a few of the tables that exist anywhere. I may do work on it, but that's their problem. And they know where performance has issues, and they take a look, and from what I've been told, that's not an issue. That they determine the correct optimizer plan, and it basically doesn't change.
So the performance team is...
Yes. It's overhead, and if we do a lot of queries per second, it's a really big number. I don't remember what it is, but it's a really big number, and every time, every one of those queries being optimized, it's a lot of overhead. And
Does the performance team, is the data so stable that they don't have to go in and say, okay, now we need to change?
I think the correct method of accessing data is very stable, or at least that's my understanding. However, that's not my job. Yes, I spoke of what languages we want, and for what the database teams do, it's mostly out of that. Facebook has a lot of really, really good automation available from other folks inside the organization, and that's in a variety of other languages as well. But it's a very open sourcey company, so a lot of what we use is open source, and pretty much everything is written in an open source language.
Are you mostly Bash or mostly...
It's a combination, whatever makes sense. You can get a lot done in Bash really quickly, but if you want to write a script that does a whole lot of things and you need to know when anything fails, every other line is going to be if $? It is what it is. Wow. Hour and 15 minutes in, and I guess we're out of questions. Not that I know of. Stored procedures. Speaking for myself, I really, really, really dislike MySQL stored procedures. The language is not fun to deal with.
Oh, who doesn't love PSM?
Yeah, so if you're from DB2 world, you probably like MySQL stored procedures. I don't like MySQL stored procedures much at all.
What are the common ETL tools you guys use?
I don't know.
Are they more open source or?
I don't know. I see queries, and I may occasionally yell at the ETL folks, but I don't actually deal with their software at all. All right.